Welcome to Season 3 of Maintaining Mental Fitness, a free webinar series to support mental fitness for organizations and individuals in an endemic world. A big thank you to our sponsors, the Continuing Care Safety Association and Biz Safety Software.
Go ahead, Norah.
I was just going to say, thanks, good to be here.
I'm going to throw out a quick apology / notice for everyone. I have all kids home today, and so there's maybe yelling and screaming in the background, and not to be alarmed. It's just debates over a toy or or book or something. So you don't need to throw up an alarm if you hear stuff that's banging, smashing, and yelling in the background. It's just my kids. But I'm super excited for the conversation today. I've had the good fortune of knowing Norah for a few years now, and supporting with her journey at Durham School Board. So me being able to have her willingness to come and speak with us is super exciting for me, because I know she'll have a lot of insights for everyone to hear and listen to. And without further ado, I'm going to kind of get right into it. But maybe first, to get people to know who you are, Norah, I'd just be curious, over the last year, there's a lot of different things that we've all been experiencing and feeling. What's one for you that really sticks out that you think is an interesting one that has happened over the last 12 months as you've been navigating all the different challenges that many organizations and people have been navigating?
Thanks, Jesse. Actually, your introduction in terms of your kids being at home, I think would link to my interesting event from the year. And that was being a mom is something that I've always really defined myself by. And we now have 3 children in their 20s. And COVID was really tough watching young adults navigate it. And so we decided to take advantage of the freedom of last summer in terms of pandemic restrictions and be with our 3 children on a holiday. And so it was both so wonderful to have the whole family together again. Geographically, we are separated during the course of the year. And it was also by day 5, oh my gosh, can they go out without us? Because I just need some space. So it was, that bittersweet moment of what all parents, I think, experience: the love, the want to be close, and then the, oh, thank goodness I've got some time. So that's the importance of finding things, though, that do rejuvenate you during what we've been through, I think, is really important. And that was certainly my choice, despite the moments where I was like, oh my gosh, I need some space.
And just picking up on what you just said, because I think it can lead into this idea of leading with humanity. But and to put you on the spot a little bit, so that might have been like your big charger as almost a one-off event. But on the day-to-day, I would hazard to suggest you probably have a pretty demanding schedule and are facing many different challenges, both within your control and outside of your control. Government, politics, all the stuff is coming at you. So what do you do day to day to actually find that charge or ability to kind of take a moment to ground? I think, those leaders that are dealing with similar things, I think could benefit from listening to what are those things for you.
Yeah, so I would say it's changed over time. And I've now adjusted from a concept of day-to-day balance to harmony overall. So last night, I was in a board meeting till 10:30 p.m. I was back in a boardroom at 8:30 this morning, and I had a couple of reports to read in between. So, yesterday wasn't a stellar day in terms of my balance. But what I try to do over a course of a week is to make sure that I get some of, for me, it's yoga and the gym are really helpful in terms of feeling like it's just internal processing time. I'm an introvert that lives an extroverted life, and I think many leaders feel that their leadership needs to be extroverted because of the roles that we play and the responsibilities that we have. So for me, it's those introverted activities like that, and sense of bigger picture thinking that you sometimes get during those processes, as well as reading. So those are the things that I know really rejuvenate me, in addition to, making sure that I've got some trusting friends and family that I can just be myself with, because sometimes when you're the person responsible for others, how you interact with them is a little bit different.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think it, again, leading into our conversation, because I think it's an interesting tension to hold where, as a leader, and particularly the most senior leader inside an organization, it can feel isolating or feel like the weight of the world's on your shoulders. And with that, you need to portray an image of like, I've got it all solved. I've got all the things sorted out and the answers had. While also on the other side, we're seeing there's such growing research on, how do we have humility? And I would even, further suggest like humanity within our leadership. So, for you, what are some things that we should think about and as it relates to either holding that tension or even trying to find ways in which we could possibly lead with more humanity?
Yeah, so I want to clarify, I never act like I've got it all figured out. Anyone who knows me knows that about me. I like to say it's one of my leadership charms that I put it out there, all of my imperfections, for people to think, okay, she's not perfect, maybe I don't need to be perfect. But that is part of leading with humanity. What for me, the unfiltered humor that I get with trusted individuals is a bit different than what I would introduce into a workplace, because humor can be a really good thing, but it has to be one where you understand the nuances of it and who you're working with. So in terms of that humanity and leading with humanity, I think that humbleness and sense of imperfection and not being afraid of mistakes. And I think, sometimes we can get paralyzed with worry about making an error. And yet I think it's really liberating for an organization when they see leaders that are willing to admit when they haven't got it quite right, and acknowledge and own that, but also more importantly, when others don't get it quite right, that it's approached rather than from a punitive perspective or a frustrating perspective, but more rather, okay, so what are we going to learn and how are we going to grow from this? And what is the value? And sometimes when people take risks, it may not turn out as well as it could have, but sometimes that's where brilliance lies. And I think that is one of the wonderful things about creating that safe environment that leading with humanity is. So I think you hit it on the head in terms of that humility. I think you have to be approachable and people need to see you as really authentic, a real person. And I think you have to be compassionate, because in the work that we do, we encounter all different sorts of stories. So building those relationships really does come down to being compassionate when people aren't their best, and being grateful that you have an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives by the way in which you encounter those challenges that they may be having and the challenges the organization may be having, and look at it as an opportunity of possibilities, instead of looking at it like we have to fix this and a rushed fix it mentality. So I think nurturing those relationships is really important.
Yeah, like I was thinking as you described a lot of different attributes, and as you were chatting there, I noticed that particularly at the beginning, there was a lot centering around the idea of mistake. And I'm just, again, even thinking for myself, I wonder if we even jumped ahead and said, well, what is, in say a simple sentence, like when you think about the idea, or if you had to put a definition to leading with humanity, like what would that be when you consider that? And I think you highlighted a bunch there, but I was thinking, I don't know if I have like got a hold, here's what I think it is. And it might be different for different people too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could be. I think that leading with humanity, I think that all humanity has a need to feel connected. And you feel connected through meaningful interactions and relationships. So for me, leading with humanity is investing the time in those relationships, in knowing who you're working with, and that their identity and sense of belonging has a place in the organization and in the thinking, and is actually at the center. And I think that's one of the areas we've done a lot of work in Durham District School Board, is that concept of beginning with the concept of identity, human rights, Indigenous rights, what does that mean for the staff we're serving? Because if they have that sense that they are included and their identity is valued and part of the integral thinking, then that will also then expand in terms of the service we're able to provide.
Yeah, and I think I like what you're saying. And we've talked about this a bit too, around, I think generally speaking, most people would say, yeah, if I could have people treated fairly and included and all these different elements, yeah, I'd want that for as many people as possible. However, there's emotions that get brought into that experience on both ends of the spectrum, where there's possible some emotions feel like, what are you talking about? None of this is actually happening. And in fact, now we're just becoming the, like, you can't say anything real generation, or all these different pieces. So when I think about the fact that it's likely you're going to have perceptions on opposite ends of the spectrum, some are like, yeah, we need Black Lives Matter or Indigenous rights to be a part of the conversation. It's been way too long. Then you got some saying, no, I don't want anything to change. How, as a leader inside the organization, do you get alignment within these groups and even commitment to move forward? Like, maybe is it changing the focus from being human rights to something internal to the organization, or like, how do you navigate those tensions?
So I think there's a few pieces there. And one is, I recognize there are different organizations listening in. In our example, we serve community. So we serve students and we serve their families. So what we have done in terms of the starting point was really strong evidence-informed decision-making based on data analysis. And so we've done census data. We understand who we're serving. We understand what their outcomes are, and we have seen patterns. And those patterns aren't unique to our organization, but they align with what we would see in the broader context of Ontario public education. So I think when you go back to the reason of why do we exist? And any organization, you have that mission. When you're answering that question of why do we exist? Well, we exist because public education is valued in terms of equitable opportunities, experiences, and outcomes. So our data, our evidence showed that that's not happening for students based on identity. And so there's a real compelling data analysis there in terms of, and it's not a surprise, I think, to those individuals who've experienced systemic oppression, but for others, the evidence in terms of graduation rates and all of those sorts of things, you could, if you're in a different kind of organization in terms of, public service, in terms of those you're serving, what is the quality of the experience that those individuals have based on their encounters with your organization through census, through survey data. And we do a lot of surveys of the adults in our community, so families and whatnot as well. So I think that's one part of it. The other thing is generationally, the new generations we have, but the millennials and the Zoomers, they have different expectations around inclusion. And so what we found is that affinity, as soon as you diversify, affinity groups are born where their expectation is that we're going to do better than what has happened previously. And so there's a lot of really grassroots movement, I think, propelling us forward and holding us accountable as leaders. So it's something that I would say over the last 10 years has really evolved, but the pandemic, and I think the impact on certain communities of the pandemic really have brought this home for there to be a lot more people to recognize it.
Just to follow up, one, you used the word infinity groups. When you say that, what is that referring to?
So we have groups who self-identify as a particular identity. They call themselves an affinity group, and they come together to discuss what it's like for them as a staff member in the organization based on a particular identity. So it may be that they identify as Black. It may be that they are a member of the 2S LGBTQIA community. So it's and they form their grassroots movements, but then they advocate in terms of the experience that they're having. And we've worked that thinking into some of our policies as a result, where it comes to staff relations and staff experience.
Just picking up on that too, and might take us a little off course, but I think it's a valid, because we spent the first block really talking about creating space for discomfort and learning from it, and how to, you know, get that incorporated inside your organization. I would hazard to guess, again, like what I've come to observe is that traditional building of some of the school systems may be very hierarchical in nature. And so it sounds like you're almost trying to flip the switch, saying, hey, let's get these grassroots things going. But I also could expect that the senior people in the organization, that could feel really uncomfortable listening to that information, and even fighting a little bit your own ego, saying, well, I know best, I've been here I've done all these things. Like, again, how do you balance those elements and really, I guess, incorporate the humanity within, you know, the strategies that are ultimately going to be driven forward from this information?
Yeah, I wish I had a perfect science for how we manage that. I think one of the things that we have consciously tried to do is to ensure that we have diversity of voice even in the senior leadership team, and recognizing that, you know, everyone has their own story, and everyone's story is important to them. And when we recognize systemic issues, that's not to say that the individual stories of others don't matter. It definitely does in terms of their individual experience. But we're trying to do, when we're making cultural decisions, is what applies to systemically to all individuals who perhaps share a particular identity. And I think that's one of the differences. The other thing is there's a lot of work being done, I would say, in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion in most organizations. But the thing we have to make sure is that it's not about becoming diverse. That's not the goal. We have to, I mean, it is part of it, but there's no point in being diverse if you're not going to then let the diversity of voices inform. And so it's like, it has to be, and it is uncomfortable, because there are times when there are things that are go-to that it's just so ingrained in terms of how we work, that suddenly, you know, the battery charging is a really good example, Jesse, and you and I have talked about this a little bit in terms of when we think about what charges us up. What we heard really loud and clear from some of our racialized staff was that they're never fully charged, because on a daily basis, they're having to encounter so many microaggressions and within the workforce. So it's, I think it's it's part of being that humble and not thinking you know it all, and trying to figure out, how do you build a cohesive strategy based on that diversity? And I think part of that cohesive strategy is actually acknowledging and valuing that there will be diversity, and therefore we have to differentiate and individualize based on the needs.
Yeah, and to bring back what you said earlier too, which I think was really key as it relates to this and really any initiative, is recentering on your why. Like, why are we here? What is our purpose and what we're trying to do? And how does this integrate to that purpose? So it doesn't actually become a human rights strategy or an inclusion strategy. It's a decision of, we want to move towards our purpose. And in order to do that, we need to do all these other things. The other element that I feel like is worthwhile bringing in, because, you know, you mentioned connection being at the forefront, and, you know, the idea of, like, for me, that means we got to create space for it, and we got to prioritize that and do it. And then if you happen to get enough space to do it, which is sometimes a challenge, saying like, I get it, but I have no time. The other element to that I feel comes up is, you know, if you're engaging in these conversations, I could feel it'd be really likely that the burdens of the conversation start to come on to you as a leader, and even impact you and your own health and your own charge, because of wanting to be compassionate and understanding. So I'm just curious, like, as that seeking for humanity to really understand perspective, how do you maintain boundaries for yourself, if you have any thoughts on this, to
so that it doesn't wear you down and you can still have the capacity to move things forward, which I think is a real interesting thing to navigate.
Yeah, so I think, you know, part of the culture is that collaboration is pretty tough work. It's slower work than just going off and getting something done. So it's the valuing of the process too, and accepting that there's going to be conflict as part of that collaborative work. It's not to say that there wouldn't be conflict in other models either. There is, but it can look a bit different because the conflict here is really front-ended as you try to collaborate in terms of a joint understanding and implementation plan of the work. The compassion fatigue is one that I think, you know, mental health across the nation is, people are talking a lot more about mental health, and compassion fatigue is definitely part of being aware of it and maintaining your own mental health. I think we can't expect of ourselves to be a counselor. We can't expect of ourselves to be the sole problem solver. And so we have to be really clear what our role is. And being compassionate doesn't mean you start to own everyone else's problems. It means you help direct them if they really do need some serious or interventions, right, in terms of the programs you offer. It means that you think about your big scale work. So for example, one of the meetings I was in this morning was about the mental health strategy for employees and how do we get lots of people working on that strategy so that it doesn't feel like it's all resting on one individual, but it is the work of the organization. I also, you know, you need to ask for help. And Jesse, one of the reasons why we got to meet originally was because I recognized that there were a lot of people who wanted to tell their story when I arrived in Durham, because it was a district that was, you know, publicly in some trauma in terms of the leadership that had occurred. And it was, I'm not telling tales out of school because it was, you know, publicly reported on in national newspapers in terms of the culture here. And so there were a lot of people who wanted to tell specific stories about what happened to them. And I knew I couldn't meet with everybody who wanted to meet with me, and they did not want to meet with anybody else in this organization. And so that was when we connected and came up with the idea of the, you know, you doing the listening tours. So that people felt like they could tell their story, that their story would matter and make a difference, and that we could then report back to them, these are the things we heard from you, and this is how we're going to try to navigate making the culture better here. So I think it's that understanding when you're getting your own personal resources are getting low. And if it's not within the organization, trying to seek those that have that experience in terms of supporting you through it for the same end, but it's just a matter of who's offering it.
Yeah. I love that you went immediately to, you know, support as your way of having boundaries, and that it's a load that can be shared. And again, I think sometimes as leaders, we can try to hold on to everything to own as something that's ours. The other element I think is a worthwhile thing to acknowledge is even you discussing and bringing forward to where you were in terms of what was happening without getting into all the nitty-gritty details. But that was true. This is what happened. And I think sometimes we can shy away from that honesty because it may be, you know, think that people can't handle it and accept it and moving forward. When I find that often we can. And maybe our last question, and I'll open up, see if there's a few in the audience, is, you know, within this journey, it sounds like you've had a number of different learning opportunities, and it's something we like to really hone in on. Is like, if you had to think of it, and I know there's probably 900, but what's the one thing for you that you find that you need to learn, relearn, screw up, learn, relearn, and keep doing? Like, is there one thing that sticks out for you as you're going through your leadership journey?
Yeah. So I think I'm a relatively confident person. You know, I've experienced success early on in my life and continued to build on that. And I've had all kinds of different experiences. And so sometimes when I feel passionately, I can really speak in terms of a vision very strongly. And I need to relearn constantly, making space to not necessarily come on so strong, to make sure that I'm actually valuing the voices around me. And when you're creating that open culture, and it hasn't been an open culture, it's not like you flip a switch and everything's rosy. In fact, you get inundated more and more with the things that aren't necessarily working well. And so that notion then of wanting to speak confidently and say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and default to that fix-it mentality versus taking it and then understanding, A, it's healthy for people to be talking about how we can improve and what's not meeting their needs. B, it's a sign of trust that they're doing it. And you have to behave trustworthy then in terms of what they're giving to you. And so stepping back and really thinking about process over product. And that is so tough. But at the end, I think the product is a better outcome. But I find that very, like, I constantly have to, gauge myself. And the team recently said to me, the senior team, Norah, we know you really want to get X, Y, and Z done, but, some of us need a bit more time to work through the nuances of it. And so that's when I constantly have to hold myself back on.
Yeah, jumping to action. It's such a true one. Jumping to action before allowing for everyone's experience to kind of come along, I think is a one that because I think you've mentioned the word a few times, and just interested when you say process, like, is that I think sometimes we can get like, it can be layers of bureaucracy can be associated with that word. But for you, when you think of process, is it just the steps? So like, what does that mean to you? Because I think it's a really important thing in focusing on versus the idea of just the outcome trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so I guess I view it in terms of process and product. And so when you're responsible for a particular project, the task management of that project is the product, right, in terms of implementation. So for me, not jumping to all of the work, like not rushing the work to get there, because sometimes in the process of building the relationships and engaging the voices of community, of staff, and in our case of students, of course, what we find is that what we learn in that process, the learning opportunity, really then changes what we plan on implementing. And had we not slowed that part down and just rushed to get the job done so we can implement this action plan or this resource, instead slowing it down and really engaging in consultation and collaboration is changing what the product is, but B, it's also building real engagement along the way of a sense of ownership of many more individuals in the work that we do.
I like how you brought that forward. Like, so it's not necessarily the tasks. It's the really, I'm hearing like we need to create space to bring people and gain perspective before jumping even to the tasks that need to get done to create the output. Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day and fitting us in between what sounds like a lot of board meetings and things what I can only imagine are super exciting. So really appreciate you bringing your expertise and experiences to the table, and look forward to hopefully chatting again in the future. So thanks so much, Norah.
Thank you. It was really nice to connect again.
Yeah. Have a great day.